Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's Weekly Energy Boost. My name is Elisheva. I'm here this morning with David, and we are also excited to introduce in a moment this week's special guest. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, the Weekly Energy Boost, which will be focusing this week on extreme, irrational, and anxiety-causing fears. We get together every Monday morning live here on Facebook, but we're also on all the platforms in which you find your podcasts. We share with you the most practical and powerful wisdom according to the teachings of Kabbalah, which is an ancient universal technology that teaches us how to get the most out of our lives. And we do that in a way like a spiritual forecast. You may find this week or this month, actually, that's what this month we're focusing on, the topic of fear, because it is a month in which the worst case scenarios plague us. It's not a coincidence that there is so much turmoil in the world right now and so much uncertainty and confusion. And our goal here is to provide you with the most practical and powerful wisdom and tools so that you can navigate not only this week or this month, but anytime you find yourself in a situation where you are caught off guard by your fears and anxiety. That's why today we are sharing the mic this week with Dr. Rachel Glik, who is a longtime Kabbalah student and spiritual counselor. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment, but she is a good friend and also on the side teaches Kabbalah. So she has a wealth of perspective and experience on guiding people as they navigate the rocky terrain of paralyzing fears and anxiety. So Rachel, welcome.
Thank you.
Rachel,
so excited to be
Rachel's
here.
actually in St. Louis, so we're Zooming her in. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and maybe give some context to why we chose you to come in to talk this morning?
So what I do for my main professional job is I'm a counselor, marriage counselor, and individual counselor with a special emphasis on with a gentle spiritual focus. So I work with people, they reach out often because of anxieties, quite honestly, or they reach out because they're having troubles in their marriage or all sorts of different self-esteem issues. But I have found that after starting to study Kabbalah around 16 years ago, that my capacity to help people by blending the empowering wisdom of Kabbalah along with what we know about healing and trauma and self-esteem and relationships, that is a wonderful blend I have found people can kind of move along in their journey more deeply, and they also move along in their process more quickly.
And, for those of us that may be listening and not even sure if what we're talking about today is relevant for them. And by the way, you may be listening and saying this is not my issue, but people who have challenges in this area, and you can share what you're hearing in the show from them. You can share the show with them directly. What is anxiety really, Rachel?
Well, I like to think about anxiety from kind of holistically. It's an experience in the body. Anxiety creates, it's typically like tension in the chest, tightness in the shoulders. It is a constricting feeling. It's often a pit in the stomach. And so it's a very unpleasant feeling to be in your body when you're in the experience of anxiety. And anxiety also affects the way we think. So it's also very fear-based, thinking the worst kind of belief system in terms of that. That's how we know we're in a state of anxiety, is when we examine where our thoughts are. And it's often there's many different kinds of anxiety. So there's generalized, that would be just a general day-to-day worry that we're just, whatever it is we're experiencing, that even like having a project due creates just a really disruptive experience of enjoying one's life because you have this project. And then there's social anxiety, which means you have an intense fear of being rejected or intense fear of being embarrassed or feel foolish. And so it really robs us of our experience viscerally of enjoying and our lives.
What was that anxiety called? What was the second one called?
Anxiety.
Social anxiety.
Social. Some people call it social phobia, but it's now called social anxiety disorder. When you have an intense, there's a new term even for just an incredible, exaggerated fear of being rejected.
So there's an anxiety of being rejected, you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
What is that called?
I just saw it for the first time. That it's got like 4 words. I can't remember, but it was pretty self-explanatory. Is some sort of excessive.
And what was the first one
fear.
called? What was the first one called? This is good.
This is social anxiety disorder, which used to be called social phobia.
Okay. I thought that was the second one. You said something else, the first one.
But the first one was generalized anxiety, which is a general walking through life worrying, walking through life with like small things just feel really big.
And as we go through this, by the way, all the people who are live streaming with us on Facebook and YouTube, we're following both chats. If you want to ask a question or talk about a certain situation that you want help on from both the world of science merging with the world of Kabbalah, we're all teachers of Kabbalah here. I think Rachel kind of brings the hybrid of these two worlds.
We actually got a couple questions in advance that I can share.
Oh, you did?
Well.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. So I want people to know that live you can ask them too when we're following. Elisheva and I are following in the chat, so we can ask them to Rachel and share ourselves.
Any other kinds of anxiety you want to?
Yeah, and there's also it can also lead to separation anxiety is also a really popular one, actually,
yes,
which is, it kind of overlaps, I think, with the social, but it's more specifically about the fear of losing someone close to you, either being abandoned or like people who walk around like always checking to see if their, loved one made it safe, like excessively, not just like because they went on a flight or, so that's a separation anxiety kind of thing. And that's usually rooted in some sort of attachment trauma. This life or past lives. And then there's phobias, and that's kind of a branch of the different kinds of anxiety. And there's 3 different kinds of phobias. So, and they connect. Sometimes are the traumas we've experienced, and sometimes one, like a phobia or a panic attack, for example, can then create a phobia. Like if you have a panic attack, I had a client who had a panic attack in Target with her friends. And so then it became a phobia of going to Target. And that becomes agoraphobia, where you're afraid of big open spaces or being in public because you can't easily, without being embarrassed, leave it if you feel like you're having a panic attack.
So what are the 3 kinds of phobias?
I'm sorry, what are the other kinds?
No, what are the 3 kinds? So you said the first one was what? What do you call that one?
Well, the one I just mentioned was agoraphobia.
Okay. And
that is where people who just kind of feel safe only in their home. It can get so extreme where people don't leave, but it's because something is going on out in the world that they feel like they won't have access to something that they need to feel safe, or they'll be embarrassed. They need to exit quickly, and then that would be too embarrassing to do so. So that's agoraphobia. And then there's specific phobia, which is like the spiders or throwing up. It could be, a fear of animals. It could be a fear of thunder. Just things that are specific that are a trigger. And then there is the more social phobia. And that is, that one is like a fear of being embarrassed. Public speaking would fit in social phobia. That something would happen that you would be really humiliated.
It's powerful.
Do you find that there is a specific spiritual underpinning when someone comes to you with phobias and anxiety? Is there a commonality on the inner level? Obviously, the external, there's going to be lots of details, lots of childhood issues and triggers and things. But is there a thread that you have found runs through beneath all of these?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that whatever it is that they're experiencing in their childhood that could also have influence. It's usually the younger years. There's developmental trauma, and then incidental traumas, and school trauma, home traumas, medical traumas, but they often then do influence, at least how it appears to us in this lifetime, the kind of belief systems and the stories and the coping mechanisms that the ego constructs in order to survive. So we want to appreciate what the ego defense mechanisms create. But I would say that, though, when examining getting to the root, because that's always what I like to do, is to try to dig deeper to see what is it at the root that may be planting these nerve system traumas and thought pattern traumas. But even still, those patterns tend to run deeper than their childhood. And so for those especially who are open spiritually, we do try to examine and zoom out for what might it be that in this life, this is something for you, your journey is about overcoming this. If you were abandoned when you were a child, or you were neglected so much so that you had the experience of being so alone, then that's very common that I see that then there's this hyper phobic feeling of losing someone. But then I would say to dig deeper with that is there is the opportunity to see where is it that you are here to create a sense of connecting to your own soul, connecting to a sense of safety and to something bigger. And because that could be your barrier in expressing your purpose and shining your light. And so the ego will enjoy keeping you aback.
All right, so this is good because I think we're getting into solution mode now. I don't know if...
No, so that's one thing I want to clarify.
Because I think people are very excited to hear about solutions.
Yes. I want to jump in before we go further. We very consciously and intentionally mapped out these episodes so that we have the first last week was an introduction. This week we're looking at more of the deeper, and the key word is examination and observation. Mm-hmm. We want to spend this week looking, understanding, digging deep at what that voice, as Rachel was saying, what the voice of the ego is telling us, what constructs we've built over the decades that we've been on the planet to protect and defend ourselves. And next week, David and I will be talking more about tools and approaches to overcoming some of these things. But I think one of the most powerful things, and one of the main reasons we wanted to bring Rachel here to talk this out with us, is because that voice of the opponent or the ego creates these stories and these narratives that might not necessarily serve us or even, as we perceived, protect or defend us. We want to be able to break down what that is before we can even get to we'll talk a little bit today about preventing anxiety, but the healing we will approach on a more direct level next week.
And I want all of our listeners to remember, especially those who are on the path of the study and wisdom of Kabbalah. Many people aren't on a structured path. They just tune into us once a week and glean bite-sized versions of this wisdom. But it's very important, and I have to remind not only myself, but my students on a daily basis, that the reason why we came to this world is to be able to experience some of these fears and these anxieties, which we call in Kabbalah the desire to receive for the self alone. It's this spiritual baggage that we bring from lifetime to lifetime, that if we can correct them, and we're going to talk about those solutions of how to correct, but if we can correct them, we unlock the gates of wisdom, of certainty, of happiness, both spiritual and physical blessings. And that's the crux of what we teach in Kabbalah. And I can't tell you how many times I have students who will text and email or call and say, I'm going through this situation, this person is bothering me, and I can't imagine staying married to this person, I can't imagine this, I can't imagine all these things. And it's painful, it's definitely uncomfortable. However, we got to go back to the spiritual premise of why is the creator, the universe, sending you this specific challenge at this moment in time? What can you take responsibility for? How can you elevate? Because you must elevate first. Before you try to solve the problem, you have to elevate. You have to realize that the enemy are these fears, the spiritual baggage that we call tikkun, that we bring into this life. So I want to emphasize that that's our purpose. When you wake up in the morning, just remind yourself that's your purpose. Everything else is secondary. Your children, your family, your business, your giving, your sharing, this radio show, all of this stuff that we do.
The fact that David keeps calling it a radio show, even though it's not on the radio.
Just because it's not even important. It's like fifth on our list of course, we treat it as it being important, but it cannot be the thing that you wake up with in the morning. And the last thing I'll say before I hand it over back to you guys is every morning I wake up and I have 1,000 thoughts that run through my head, and I'm sure you all can relate, of the problems, of the things that are unresolved, of this email, or of when is that person going to get back to me, problems that haven't even happened, might happen. And I have to remind myself, and it takes me time, I got to spend 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes in the morning reminding myself what is the purpose of why I'm even alive and what is my spiritual mission, because every day it becomes 100 other things. And that's just the way it is. Doesn't matter how spiritual you were the day before. So just keep reminding ourselves that your number one mission is transformation and elevation.
Well, I think that to David's point, first of all, he's starting a new Kabbalah 1 class tonight. If you're listening on Monday, you still have, well, if you're listening anytime this week, you can still join whether you missed the first session or not. But if anything that David just said is intriguing or you want to know more, Kabbalah 1 is the place to get that. We can put the link in the comments, and we can also send you the link. You can email us at energyboost@kabbalah.com if you want more information about that. But there's a lot to be said about, you know, the work that we do. More than speaking in front of groups of people is working one-on-one with individuals. And one of the things I find people come to us constantly with is, these fears are interfering with my work. These fears are interfering with my relationship. These fears are interfering with my ability to parent or to take care of my well-being. And what David was basically saying is the opposite, that these fears are really coming to you so you will take care of them. They're not interfering. Your desire to, have a non-confrontational, a marriage that doesn't have arguments or hiccups or anything like that, that's getting in the way of you dealing with what the challenge is coming to you to deal with. And I want to hear, I know Rachel has a lot to say about this, so I want to give the mic back to her. Rachel, when you encounter individuals who see their fears or their anxieties as the problem, how do you help them work through that part?
Well, I feel like it needs to be a slow drip on our consciousness to really kind of undo the natural inclination to kind of zoom into a fear and zoom into the external versus the internal. So it's constantly reminding, and first kind of, introducing the idea, offering the idea that there is another way of looking at our fears in our lives from the inside out. And so I have found, by studying the wisdom of Kabbalah, one of the things that I think has been the most transformational is to start to grasp the power that I have in my life by the power that I have in my consciousness, and to choose my thoughts and to choose how I'm going to look at whatever it is that I'm facing, including myself. And so I find that one of the things that is, before getting into like tools of how to overcome, I think there's this preliminary kind of consciousness that is so important, which is to not see the fear as an enemy or as something that you reject or feel shame about, but really to seize it as like a map, as an indicator, as information about where there's an imbalance and where that there's something more deep inside of me that wants to have more in life, to elevate more, that this fear is showing me. It's like, I like it to think of it as a map. It's showing me exactly where my next kind of level of work is.
A lot of students think that the fear, and this is just the baseline of where everybody in the world starts, fear, this uncomfortable situation, is an impediment to my happiness, to me going to my next level, to my growth. And that is false. What we're saying, and we're not just saying it to make you feel better, this is scientific spiritual law, that fear is the stepping stone, the gate by which your marriage will improve, your friendships will improve, you'll be wealthier, you'll be more successful. You must go through that gate that is uncomfortable. There's no other gate. Every other gate that is being shown to you, besides the gate of your fear, those are the illusionary gates. Those are the gates that make you go on the hamster wheel. Those are the gates that actually take you right back to where you were. Someone told me recently about suicide. It's something, the topic that comes up, and sometimes you never know it's that person that's thinking about it or is going through depression. And what's the answer? What's the thing that we always talk about when somebody goes through that? Is that I said to this person, I said, that's okay that you feel that way, and we talked about it. I said, but you should probably know that in a past life you had these same exact thoughts. The only difference was that you did leave the world, and now here we are again at probably the same exact age that you left the world. You're having the same thoughts and the same feelings, because the gate that you chose, and we're not saying it's a good or bad gate, we're not here to judge, but the gate you chose is only going to bring you back to the same exact place you are now. So if you were to leave the world again today by your choice, just know that we're going to have the same exact conversation in your next life, and you're going to have the same wall, the same fear, and the same sadness that you must overcome.
Okay. Rachel, if it's okay with you, I want to get a little bit personal with you for a second. Is there, or I'm sure there is, the question is, what is your most, or not most, but your go-to Kabbalistic mantra when you find yourself facing challenges? We all have a favorite. I call it a mantra because it's like, you know that you have a trigger, and you know that the trigger is going to respond to one bite, one nugget of consciousness. Maybe it's just a matter of asking you right now, what is your nugget that you go to most often in your daily life?
I would say it is the true reality that the light of the Creator is right next to me, right in this, loving me, and that is why I'm right here. And, seeing it anything other than filled with light and just right to benefit me is when I can start to miss the chance to really use the experience to elevate. So I think that would be the number one, is
That's
try
beautiful.
to not only just know it as a teaching that we hear again and again, but to slow down into it and feel it in my body and make it personal to me. And
that resonates strongly. I'm moderating these Kabbalah 1, 2, and 3 classes, and in one of the last couple classes we did, we talked about how in times of darkness there's greater light. Mm-hmm. And I think that brings up something very important, because a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years that have debilitating fears, their perception is that in the darkness there is no light. There's no return. They get to these places where their fears are so consuming. Or I heard from a listener who was asking about, the tendency to go to worst case scenarios. And in those places, even when it's a relatively mundane situation, right? Something I need to buy might sell out, or, I think a lot of people that I've spoken to in the last 6 months are worried about the people that they love staying healthy. How do we keep ourselves from going to those worst case scenarios when our fears are triggered? You and I and David, we know in the times of darkness, the light is even greater. How do you work people through those moments? And
by the way, before you answer that, Rachel, I want to get a response from you that is not so Kabbalistic. Because I know the Kabbalah stuff, we that's easy. A lot of our listeners have heard this. I want to know how you combine the two worlds of your extensive background in the scientific world. I don't know what we want to call it, and how you merge that with spirituality. Because I think that's our listeners will be most excited to hear that from your perspective.
Well, I think this probably doesn't mean it excludes Kabbalah. It's so overlapping. But I think what I do when I'm faced with a challenge that, often it's in relationship, that's kind of a common one for me, is I will connect with a younger part of myself. And whether it's the girl in me that feels like unimportant or too small and insignificant. And so I will try to have a dialogue or be loving and compassionate and validating to myself from within. And so again, that's not a non-Kabbalistic idea.
That's a great answer. How do you identify? Because I don't think, I would have never thought of that. I would never have thought that what I'm going through right now can actually be solved by me going back in time.
That's the whole inner child exploration.
Right. But I would have never thought that would be the tool to use in the moment of discomfort. So how do you know, was it your 18-year-old self? Was it your 25-year-old self? I don't think most people even realize they shut down. They've closed off the past for most people. Most people aren't going to think right away, oh, you know what, this was in this happened to me in high school when this guy left me. And so what are the steps you take to even identifying that inner child, which part of your life it is?
I guess that's where it starts to become more about a therapeutic relationship, or the therapeutic aspect of connecting to the younger parts of oneself. It starts with educating oneself and awareness that what I might be experiencing right now in this lifetime is not necessarily just rooted in this one moment that's happening, that it's triggering something that in my nervous system, I've been here before and it was a bad experience. And so it's a pain that I don't want to feel. So I might do something reactive externally to try to run from that pain. But by connecting, getting to know the younger parts of us and getting to know what our triggers are, that awareness is just, it's like a power tool. I always call awareness as a power tool, because then you can then know what you can do with it proactively, because you know something is being evoked. It's very painful. That then, rather than just doing something to control it or disassociate from it or distract from it, which is most of what the ego will try to do, I can move into being with it and staying with the pain and letting it be also a teacher for me, or use it for my development. And then enter into it in a relationship with myself that is different than a relationship that I had, you know, in the past with anyone else, or with myself at the time. So it's not always clear that it's like I know exactly the moment of when something happened, but I've gotten to know myself well enough and to know what gets evoked.
That's very powerful.
I connect. I have a relationship with that part of me. It's a little abstract, but and at times, you know, it's been more concrete, where I have actual images of that girl or of those moments. But now it's more of just sort of an intuition, sort of a inner sense. And it's more like how I'll shift my consciousness and how I relate to this part of me. Sometimes it's also that I need to, you know, elevate from it and focus on what I'm, you know, grateful for, and focus on the gifts I've been given, and, you know, kind of take that younger part of me by the hand and say, look at all that we have, and let's go do something good with it.
That's powerful, because what we are talking about in our classes, and this is just adding another element to it, another color to it, is we can all agree that when you're in pain, you have to just pause. You can't look for the way to escape that pain. That escapism is the biggest problem that perpetuates the chaos, that perpetuates the lack. And whether we're talking spirituality or therapy, we're all saying the same thing. We're saying, don't run away from this. I love, Rachel, that you said that it's embedded in our nervous system, because it's embedded in the soul level. Then that leaches into the body, which is the nervous system. And that's why sometimes you look at somebody reacting to something and you're like, what's the big deal? Like, just, you know, just do the people say, why don't you just do this and just do that?
We can give all the best advice in the world to other people, but we can't help ourselves for that reason.
Oh my gosh, how many therapists are, you know, the comedians were, it's kind of like, it's always, I once talked to a therapist who was giving all this great advice, and then when I talked to her about her own life, I mean, it was like a nightmare. It was a nightmare scenario.
That's evidence to what we're talking about here, that there is this construct called the opponent that is there not to win, but to challenge us to be better, to step into our greatness, to overcome. And to me, you know, again, I know a lot of us are out here listening. You know, I know that I have fears. I know that they may be rooted in childhood, or, you know, as we learn in Kabbalah, many of those unexplainable fears, anything that you can't draw the line, you can't connect the dots to, is rooted in a previous lifetime. Maybe, Rachel, you can share with us, how does a fear go from being a fear to being, whether you call it an anxiety or debilitating, right? Because everybody has fears, but some people struggle with fears beyond the normal day-to-day, where it becomes paralyzing and debilitating.
Yes. And I'll say, I brought this upstairs. Well, I'm working from home now, so this is my home office, but I brought this book upstairs, The Fear is Not an Option, because I read the book. It was Monica Berg's book on fear, and I read it and I loved it. And then I taught a seminar on it, and then I went deeper into it. And there's so much in there. It's very simple, but it's extremely useful. So I guess one of the, you know, Monica talks about the real fears, the healthy fears, and the irrational fears. And it's really the same thing that we were talking about a minute ago, David, about, you know, awareness and really getting to know what your fears are, and picking up the subtleties of when it goes from a real fear, and then the ego hijacks us and it becomes an irrational fear. And so, for example, we may have a fear, like a real fear is that we will lose someone that's very important to us. That is part of, because we, thank God, we have a heart and we care and we love and we bond.
I'm saying it comes with loving someone, is the fear
exactly.
that they may
it's real,
not
it's
always
natural.
be there.
But what we want to look out for is where it becomes irrational is when we, start using what are called distorted cognitions. And there's a whole list of distorted cognitions. There's probably 20 distorted cognitions, but one of them is the overgeneralizing and the catastrophizing, that what you said earlier, Alicia, of thinking the worst. And so that's when we know it's moving into irrational. Big Q, it's moving into
Impending doom.
Exactly. And so and maybe this is getting too much into tools, but there's a way to handle the fear before it becomes irrational, where we are, because a lot of this is about control. Like when you ask me what's like a one word that would describe fears or at the root of it, I think a lot of it is related to control. And not feeling in control. So these irrational fears are really the ego tricking us into thinking that you can actually control this by worrying about it, by overthinking about it, by creating all these like tics and rituals that are going to stop you from being able to be vulnerable. And we're vulnerable. So the redirecting it is sort of an elevating. I like to dig in for the inner work of the knowing our emotions and our traumas, but also elevating to where we're proactive, and then we're above the fear. So like, for example, if you're afraid of losing someone, then this is an example Monica actually gives, which is to focus on how you can be as proactive as you can be with nourishing the relationship, with becoming a better partner, with showing your appreciation, making sure you do not take for granted for a minute. And then you're so busy with that, there's not time to have an irrational fear about losing.
Could it also be that sometimes your fear is, for example, let's say it's our parents. I know people who really got the opportunity, especially in the latter part of their life, to be with their parents, to give back to their parents, to resolve issues with their parents, that when that parent passes away, there's less fear attached, because I think a lot of the fear comes from all the missed opportunities, or maybe I didn't resolve stuff with my parents, or I wasn't as good of a child as I could have been. So this would also play into it. The idea that if I do everything I know on the spiritual, on the physical level, to connect deeper, to respect, to clear up any tension or issues that I've had with my parents, that will also cause the fear to dissipate, because maybe a lot of the fears that we have are that I'm going to miss the chance or lose the opportunity to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, absolutely. It creates it removes the space between you and them. And so then you are more at peace with whatever happens in the journey, more so.
Beautiful. There's a question here. I want to take some of the questions that are coming in live. Someone wrote, how do you help someone else who has depression? Which this is a good question, because I think...
Although completely off topic.
Oh, why is that off topic?
We're talking about fear, not depression.
Well... Oh, okay. Well, there's a connection. Well, I just wanted to bring it up, and the reason is that we're sometimes very good at addressing people who have a desire to change, or they're passionate. Maybe they're just reactive. They're externally reactive, and sometimes with depression, it can cause a person to shut down and to even shut down their desires, and not even have a desire to want to change or to do something about it. So I'm curious. What is your answer, Rachel, to someone who's going through that? Because obviously depression is the result of fears that haven't been dealt with, different anxieties and different negativities that haven't been dealt with. So I'm curious to see what your answer on that is.
Well, I guess when bringing up depression, it's not only, at least from my understanding, not only the fears that haven't been dealt with, but there's a lot of emotion. I see fear or anxiety as a cover emotion for a lot of other emotions that are a lot harder to be with, actually. Anger and anxiety I have watched be just a go-to. Mm-hmm. Whereas there may be a lot of sadness that really needs to be expressed and released from the nervous system and grieved, and before you can really come to a place of using, that for your own growth. But I think with trying to help anyone, whether it's with anxiety or depression, it's a similar... And the two of them tend to come together. They're sort of cousins. They have a similar root. But nonetheless, in helping, I think one of the first things is we tend to want to rush people in their process because it's so painful for us that they're struggling. And so, a person always feels safer to be near you and come to you when you are not judging them or not frustrated with them or not trying to fix them. And so making yourself an open kind of safe person is really important, and to be patient, because it's very draining though to be connected to somebody who's struggling with mental health challenges. So you have to really make sure you take care of yourself and know where your personal boundaries end and theirs begin, and know that you can only do so much. But there are times when you can actually, I've gone with someone, actually a good friend, to the counselor with them because they just had a phobia, I think, of actually taking the step and going. This person had just moved to St. Louis and was really struggling. And so, seeing how you might be able to get a little bit more involved, but in a way that isn't out of frustration with them or rushing them, but how you might be able to take them by the hand and see if you can get them the next steps of help that they need.
Beautiful.
Is there anything you can recommend to us for preventing or, like as you said, proactively interrupting that process, that going from fear to phobia or fear to anxiety?
Yes. I think getting to, like when it first starts, when you first start to feel afraid, or is, catching them when they're real and healthy and doing something proactive. And then I think kind of on a regular basis, knowing what is going on inside of you and knowing what some of the other, because the fear comes to teach us something to grow for our benefit. So if we're proactively looking for what's my next step, what is it that I want more of, and how can I proactively go for that? Or where is it that I need to resolve something in myself that, like, for example, confronting isn't always easy for me. And so, like, if I have an opportunity where rather than a fear cycle starting, then I might say, I think for my growth, I might just need to say something. And then that will stop sort of the, kind of ruminating and going round and round and being afraid of what will happen. Or so I think being aware of what it is that your own themes are, your own patterns and lessons, and then going proactively to address those. And I find that studying, listening to 10 luminous emanations, reading the Zohar, studying the spiritual wisdom just puts me in such a whole nother plane that it's like a zooming out. In fact, that was a class recently, a TLE class I watched last week about zooming out versus zooming in. When you notice yourself zooming in and like making that one thing you don't have or that's lacking become everything, then zoom out and start doing other things, like take care of your body, make sure that you have a hobby, make sure that you are taking care of your marriage, and not just maybe the work thing that you're like really focusing on. So staying balanced, because fear is an indicator that something is out of balance. So doing things on a regular basis to look at what your big rocks in the jar are and making sure that you're investing in those sort of creates like a protection shield from the fear showing up as a messenger for being out of balance.
I have two tools that I wanted to share, but before I do, Elisheva, I know you got something on the tip of your tongue. You want to say?
I don't want you to share tools till next week.
No, we can't live. You don't want us to share any tools of how to deal with anxiety?
Well, I want Rachel to give her nuggets, but we have a whole show that we're going to dedicate to different approaches and understandings of helping people overcome their fears. So
sorry,
unless
guys.
you want nothing to talk about next week.
Well, there's always going to be good stuff to talk about, but that's okay. That's okay.
So maybe we'll talk about restrictions.
Well, no, Rachel, I think we would be doing our listeners a disservice if we wouldn't talk about the absolutely justifiable fears that everyone is having now on some level or another, whether related to COVID or the political situation. And I know everyone, whenever I say that, I think people always think, oh, she's talking about the elections in the U.S. The other country, I mean, we have in Venezuela, it's one of the countries that we have the highest listenership. In Mexico, in the Arab world, like there's so much. We're out there all over the world. That's one of the reasons I don't want to ever focus on what's happening in California or in the U.S. How there is so much evidence physically around us, news headlines, financial market stuff. How can we not only give in to those fears that are totally materially justifiable, but also use those external evidence to grow and strengthen ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I think whatever I'm finding that wherever people are in their own relationship with themselves and their own consciousness and their own mental well-being, that is just being intensely triggered right now. So if you're not in a place where you feel you have the agency in your life, that I'm accountable for my growth, things come to me as opportunities, and it's really going to be a lot harder. It's going to be like the pressure just can keep pushing down and down. But I do find that the more that we can look at what's happening as the opportunities that they are, then that becomes where we do have control. And I was just talking with a woman this morning about that, is really focusing on like what Michael Berg said recently that I love, which is we're not here to control reality, but to embrace our soul's process. So anytime, that's what we have control over. So I would say, look for where it is that you do have control. Like, where does it you want to make sure that you're kind no matter what's going on around you? Where is it that you're, like David said earlier, working on your own transformation? Has nothing to do with what's happening around us. That's something inside. But there's a simple thing that I love that I wanted to add, that is, Deb Dana I do a lot of work with trauma, and in the past 10 years, the focus has shifted more to somatic work, like how you move trauma through the nervous system, and how much we can create like a corrective emotional experience where we can almost redo the experience, but our body has a different response to it. So it no longer stays stuck. But one of the things that one of these therapists who do this somatic work her name is Deb Dana, and she has a book called Polyvagal Theory. And she talks about a concept called glimmers. There are triggers, which are cues of danger. And we have a lot of cues of danger right now. But there are also glimmers, and those are things that we have in our life already and can add in our life, where we are safe and we are warm and we are connected. And so as much as we can find things that we have in our life and we can embellish in our life, it could be connected to ourselves, connected to something bigger, connected to nature and animals and people in our lives. It could be a simple thing of making the bed that gives you some sort of a good feeling, or it could be, breathing, or music, or familiar people. It goes on and on, the things that we can do that make us feel warm, safe, and connected. And I think we need to really increase those right now, and really kind of have our mind focused on looking for where those are.
That's beautiful, because when I think of the word glimmer, I think of the word sparks, and we're always talking on the show about elevating sparks. That's a really beautiful visual on really technique on how to take ourselves from the shift focus, I guess is the right word, to shift our focus from what isn't or what might not be to what is and what is amazing.
So I'm going to share a tool. People are writing. People are writing. They have to have a tool. From my point of view, we've spoken about many tools, but I will elaborate upon it. I'm just gonna dip my toe in the pool here, and then we'll pick it up next week, because I see we're nearing the end of the show. I just think it's so powerful, because the Kabbalists, we have prayer. We talk about prayer all the time. We have structured prayer. But the structured prayer is only a couple thousand years old, and
only
a couple thousand years old relative to what the Kabbalists actually revealed was an unstructured prayer. We're talking all the way since the beginning of man. How would man pray? It was a silent shouting from deep inside themselves.
Humans.
Mankind.
Yeah. Humankind.
Not a man.
David, humankind.
Humankind. Okay.
Thank you.
So how would humankind basically pray? What was their way of communicating with the divine? And that was that silent shouting from deep inside their soul. And what that would do is create an energy. It would create a frequency. It would expand their desire, which would expand their vessel, to allow the universe to kind of like rotate faster around them, to make things happen, to bring to fruition different realities quicker. That's what prayer is. Prayer is an expansion of your vessel and your desire, which then shifts the world. And something that I practice daily, besides the structured prayer that we talk about, is an unstructured prayer, which no one can hear. And something that Rachel said is, if I want to know something that happened in my childhood that I can't really remember, I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes just with my eyes closed and ask over and over and over again. It could be hundreds of times saying the same phrase. Show me. I want to reveal the source, the root of my chaos right now, or of my pain right now, of my challenge. And I want people to know that you can do this anytime, anywhere. You could be on the subway, you could be in the car, you could be waiting at a doctor's office, you could be waiting at a checkout line in a grocery store, and you can do this for free. You don't need anything else. You don't need any Kabbalistic tools. It's just you and the light of the Creator. And if you ask for something over and over and over and over and over again, deeply from inside yourself, you're sending a signal out to the universe to reveal that to you. So a lot of times we hear like, well, how do you do this? Well, how do I get out of my anxiety? How do I whatever? And if you ask over and over again, show me how, open my eyes. I want to know. I want to understand. If you really want to know, you make it a priority. Then things are revealed to you. The reason why answers aren't revealed to us, the reason why some people are listening to this radio show right now and they got an I'm sorry, not a radio show, the podcast or whatever you want to call it. The reason why people are tuning in now and some people are not is because that person earlier in the day somehow requested, I want to know how to get rid of my anxiety. It could have been a passive thing. It could have been a more conscious thing, but they said it. And because they said it, their body, their consciousness, everything led them to all of a sudden seeing that we're live and it's about anxiety. And then they said, okay, let me listen to this. When you are clear about something that you want and you communicate it with the universe obliges and starts to put you on that path to understanding it and revealing it. But if you're not doing that, then you're just extending your process and it's going to take longer and longer.
Rachel, we have about 30 seconds left. Do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Well, I guess two things come to mind. One is that I want to thank David. I love this show, by the way. I just can never get enough of it. I love it. And I, every morning now, because of what you've talked about on the show, do start my day with more consciousness than I did before. Like I write down where I need help, and I forget to ask for help all the time. So that's a good reminder. And, you know, where I want my consciousness to be during the day, or just what kind of gem I want to have as my kind of, flashlight throughout the day. But I guess one of the main things is I want people to really understand is how much you can overcome your anxiety and your fears, and how much that your power that you have within you is way more than you think. And I've just experienced it. I didn't know that I had that kind of power because I'm a very emotional person. I've got so much water in my charts that I'm like swimming all the time. But I have identified how much power I have over my own mind, my own conscience, my own choosing of where I put my thoughts and actions and words, that it's extremely exciting. It's a really fun game. And I just want, I hope to inspire people to, it's worth the effort.
Amen to that.
Beautiful, beautiful. And the final thing is that you mentioned it in, 1 hour, 5 hours.
David's class.
Yeah, in 5 hours, I'll be doing the Global Kabbalah one. Because it's going to be 4 p.m. Pacific time. Most people who attend, last time we had about 1,500 people, almost 1,500 people who registered from all around the world, from mainly not the U.S. So this is an opportunity for friends, family to access it. I'm going to teach it in a new way. I'm going to use the curriculum. I'm going to teach it in a new way, new emphasis, new types of topics, new tools, and it's also pay what you can. So if a person can't afford it, they don't have to pay anything. If they can't afford something, obviously they're donating towards a good cause to allow other people to study through this model. And we'll begin it tonight in about 5 hours.
Amazing. So on behalf of all of our listeners and David and myself, thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us this morning. As usual, you can continue to comment put your comments in the comment section of the video. If you're listening on podcast and have questions or comments, you can always email us at energyboost@kabbalah.com. And as promised, next episode will be completely dedicated to sharing tips, tools, and processes that can help you overcome your fears. Have a fabulous week, and thanks for listening to the Weekly Energy Boost.